Yeah. We're live and local.
Don't tell us we're live,
Yeah.
Sam.
That would actually be kind of fun to do a live show at some point where there's no backsies.
Yeah.
You know, like, if we screw it up, it's just like,
Yeah.
well, they
would
suck.
that be fun?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know.
Boy, oh boy, what a stumble. What did I hear on the weekend? A foible?
Never heard of it. Never heard of her.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Foible.
What are we going to talk about today?
Well, I mean, we had an episode already on being broke and who likes to be broke. We wanted to run away from this episode so hard, but we're like, we need to lean into this because I think it's a part of everybody's journey, and some people actually talk about it.
Yeah, and because we told everybody we'd have a part 2. We committed to a part 2.
We're like,
part
oh,
one.
no. Do we have to talk about when we were broke again? And I think there's some today's content is really about being practical.
Yeah.
Like let's break down into being broke, what to do about it, how we got there in the first place, and I think that's another piece of it is successful people, people that have a lot of material wealth. So many people have been bankrupt.
Yeah.
Times that they barely could make it, and makes for cool stories. So if you're in that position now, just think, you could be one of the greats.
It's the American dream. To get broke and then
a whole list of credit cards.
Hustle to refine it. Get back on your feet.
But I think the point being is don't be discouraged in that moment because we've all been there, and we've all had to do something about it, and it's a symptom of a larger problem, and it's not just something to be discouraged by.
Yeah, no, it's true.
So,
and information, we want to not just give information because it's never just the content itself is not the solution to a problem.
Oh, wouldn't that be great if it was?
Yeah, I wish.
Like just listen to enough podcasts and you'll just be amazing.
No, you actually have to apply it. You actually have to work for it, and which I wish it wasn't, that case in a lot of areas. But unfortunately, got to buck up and do it.
My dad's a builder. I remember him talking to somebody and giving him some counsel, and his comment was, "Yeah, I know all that, Mike." And my dad's response, "Well, it's not just knowing it; you have to do it."
Do it, yeah.
And I think a lot of times, I think that's one of the reasons why we want to be really practical today and not get overwhelming in theory about, there's this approach and that approach. It's really, one practical step in the right direction is better than 50 theories.
Yeah.
So hopefully we get one practical thing today.
I think there's a couple more.
Yeah, at least one.
Yeah, exactly.
At least one take home, guys.
Right.
So consistency, discipline. I mean, so often it's so easy to pull off one great win, but to be consistent with is much better than pulling off the heroic act. It's just the discipline to be
follow through.
Yeah, right. Well, and it shows up in some interesting spots, like being able to invoice consistently, being able to issue change orders consistently. Like if you're missing those things, well, you're gonna be a world of hurt. So building accurate estimates, like all of those things impact our bottom line, which could be what kind of precipitated being broke.
Yeah, for sure.
So those things are really important. In the last episode, we talked a lot about some of the symptoms and then how they, the causes of those symptoms. And today we're kind of breaking down sort of another angle on this, but the symptoms are the same.
Right.
Consistently out of money.
Yep.
The account's drained or overdrawn. That's scary. The bills aren't getting paid, and just you're having a constant cash flow struggle. Yeah. So I mean that's kind of broke. A definition of broke, I think.
Sounds really uncomfortable.
Oh, it's so uncomfortable, and I know all about it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
so we're gonna talk about that today. No, but I would just kind of interject too. We'd love people's feedback, as we get into this topic and giving commenting on our videos and our content and things like that. We'd love to just know what have you experienced, what have you learned, and just bringing some humility to the table and helping us navigate through that together and being a community in some of that. Just a thought that came up, and I was just want to encourage you guys to do so. Yeah,
that's
also,
great.
We'd love to
great
be a
call
resource,
out.
so.
Yeah. Recap the last episode for us, Kinsey.
Yeah. So last episode we really talked about a few different problems. Lack of knowledge being one, just lack of understanding where people are at as a business, and obviously go back and listen to it if you missed it. We dive into more details and some practical things as part of that as well, but really just not knowing where where you're at as a business being a huge problem and risk.
Are you making money? Are you losing money? How fast? Where are you from day to day?
Exactly. Yeah. Not selling enough was another, topic that we mentioned. And, maybe you don't have enough work to keep you busy, keep your team busy, things like that. So really just diving into, that's a core problem as to why you may not have money. Poor estimating. We obviously talk about estimating all the time. We care a lot about people knowing their numbers, knowing what jobs cost. But if we're just throwing around numbers at jobs and you don't actually know what it costs, then it's a huge risk point and problem to, potentially why you're broke.
Eventually, something bad's going to happen.
If it's not the last, you may make bank on one, that you throw round numbers on, but the next one, if it's a little bit more complicated or, scope's bigger, things like that, there's just a lot more risk. And
I think one of the other things to call out a part of that too is I think some people think, well, what's the risk to that? You throw a big enough number at it, you'll always win. But in a situation where you have to go back to your customer and you don't have specifics, then it's very difficult to say this is a change order when they're saying, well, it's not enough detail behind it. And so that's another thing to call out there too.
Great point. And then it really overspending. Obviously that seems, of course, if you're spending more than you're making, that's a problem in life and in business. And so that's really a core problem of, you may not have to have the new truck right now. And it really kind of what we talked about was not necessarily that you can't buy the thing when you want to buy the thing, but maybe the timing's just off, things like that. So breaking that down is really some of the core things that we talked about.
That's good.
But kind of want to dive into more solution practical. So maybe intro some of that.
One of the interesting things as I talk to people, we have really an incredible privilege of talking to a lot of contractors and a lot of people, because we're a software business, that really our mission and the reason why we exist is to enable people to succeed and to win and to provide a tool as a part of that process. But there's inevitably a lot of conversations we have, and there's a real danger in misdiagnosing a problem because there's so many really easy talk-offs. The stories are really like, well, good helps tough to find. Like these are these cliches, these one-liners about why a problem exists, well, the economy really sucks these days. And these are the kinds of very simple, like one-liners that you hear a lot of. Yeah.
I'm not trying to be offensive, but whenever I hear things like that, I'm like, I really don't like it when my kids whine. There's like an underlying
excuses. Yeah. My mom would drive me.
Hard things about that.
I remember growing up, my mom would drive me crazy when I would ever make an excuse for something. And she would say, now, Ben, you know what excuse is, right? She's like, it's the skin of a reason just stuffed with a lie. Wow. It would just, anyway, and it's so true, but it's so offensive because when you're the one making the excuse, the last thing you want to hear somebody tell you is, you're lying. It's really frustrating. But there's nothing like a good example, so irritating.
That's true. So what do you do?
Well, I think number one, let's take inventory. And a lot of times it's a misstep. So when I say take inventory, it's like we're counting up all the parts. So let's zoom out for a second, get a little big picture of a company.
Let's do it.
Yeah. And say, okay, well, in one column, we have the assets that you have. And when I talk about assets, these are the vehicles, tools, equipment. You might have a building, a shop. Maybe you're leasing a building or shop, but nonetheless, that is an asset in the sense that you can produce something with that. And if you list all of those things that you own, are they making you money or are they a drain on your resources? Is the other question of like, okay, you own a truck, but are you using that truck or is it sitting in a parking lot? Do you have a crew that's using that vehicle? Do you have a backhoe or whatever the piece of equipment is? Is it making you money? The other thing is, who owes you money? So from the asset standpoint, do you have a bunch of accounts receivable? We'll get to the payables here in a second. I'm jumping ahead. But who owes you money? Do you have a bunch of invoices that are unpaid? Can you work out payment plans with those people? Can you settle with them? Like they owe you $50,000. Well, say, can you pay me 40 if you pay by the end of the week? Like get some of those things squared up. It's like, that's an asset. So taking inventory,
that's good.
What do you have going for you in assets? Then on the liability side, here we go to the accounts payable side. Who do you owe money to and kind of what time frame are they expecting? And then what do you have like recurring as well? Like, what bills do you owe? And some of those you can get away from. You have payments on trucks, you have payments on equipment. Like these are, so taking inventory in column 2 of what do you owe? Then on the sort of like skills and sort of the abilities that you possess or your team possesses, it's like, what are you particularly good at? And so what are you particularly good at, Kinsey?
I'm good at selling.
Yes, you are.
And I love like strategy, big picture, high level, solving problems and building reports, data.
Yeah, I would agree.
I'd say those.
So in your situation, you would say, well, these are the things I bring to the table. I love to sell. I love to problem solve the big picture. And then you can kind of the counter side of it being like, well, why dwell in an area? Why spend all of your time in an area where you're not strong if you can help it?
Yeah.
And so for me, it's like I love process and I love the big picture as well. I love, getting all the details lined up, and I love building a team and collaborating with people. And if I was in an area where I was just a bookkeeper or just, down in the numbers or whatever, that would kind of dilute what I can bring to the table. You're not playing in your strengths. Yeah, exactly.
And it's less efficient. It's not, Yeah.
So you might be that person that's out in the field doing something that you're not good at just because it has to get done, and really diluting yourself. So taking an asset of like, what skills do you have? What skills and then the other piece is what does our team possess as well? Like, what are we good at as a team as well? So I think that's a really important piece of it in taking inventory.
Yeah.
The other resources at our disposal is kind of this like big category we came up with of just like the random things. We might have, good friends, mentorship. You might have, like my dad's a builder, remodeler. So, I mean, he's a resource to some degree or another of somebody I can talk to about things.
Sure.
Other people that I know, I have several people that have been mentors to me. I could call up, hey, Chad, how did you solve this particular problem? Sure. And everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. And so that's another thing we have going for us.
Yeah. From the mentorship side of things, and we may get into it a little bit more, but I found that people are super willing to help if you ask for help ask specific questions and, ask them to partner with you to, even if they're in the same space. Like you could find somebody in the same space that's not in your same city.
When you say same space?
Like, sorry, like same industry, maybe does the same kind of line of work.
I'm following you. I just want to make sure it was clear to the audience.
You can find somebody, and especially with YouTube and podcasts and things like that, like there's a lot more people who are willing to give advice, and so it doesn't have to look like, well, I call up my dad if your dad's
good point
contract, so just other ways that it makes
nepotism doesn't have to be the only way of doing it. Yeah,
that's hilarious.
I think that the other danger points are like you're out of money, so the short-term solution is, well, I'll get a loan, I'll go talk to my uncle, get a loan from him. Like those are the more dangerous ones because they don't address the problem. They just are the Band-Aid of like, well, I need money
short-term.
And so therefore, isn't it kind of interesting, Kinsey, is how many people we know that need money and that's a perennial problem. They always need money. Like you can give them 50 grand and a couple, however long that takes, they will be broke again. Inevitably, guaranteed.
Yeah, it's like the lottery. I think we talked about the lottery on our last episode too.
So was money the problem, or was it just a symptom of a problem?
Yeah, symptom.
Yeah,
at that point.
Right.
Exactly.
So cash flow management. Let's dive into cash flow. And I think one of the things is we're coming from a position of really pain and saying things are bad, and so not everybody's in that position is listening to this episode either. They might just be here for the entertainment.
Probably not.
or just reflect back at bad experiences. I mean,
and it can. I mean, think about it in the way of like, how do I prevent that from happening?
Good point too.
It's like you may also not be aware there's a problem, which is just as much of a problem.
Boy, I've been that guy. Anyway. Problems are coming, but we didn't know that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So one of the more common things we have either experienced or seen other people experience is like the account is not just dry, it's negative. And I think that comes from it's a position of not knowing where things at. You talked about knowledge at the beginning of the episode of where are we at. And I think if one of the real struggles is knowing exactly where you're at. So stop all the auto payments on your account because you need to just settle that thing where zero is better than overdrawn. You're losing confidence with people you're writing checks to, and banks, whatever. It's a problem.
Yeah.
So I think if that's an issue, like if your account's overdrawn or has been recently overdrawn, it's like, okay, you need to know where that account's at, get it stable, stop the automatic stuff. Don't write checks unless you know the money's in there.
Yeah.
Don't give checks out and tell people to hold them. Those kinds of things, just stop that. I mean, I had an office manager who would issue checks and she's like, do we have money to cover that? I'm like, well, that's no question number one. Do we have the money before we start just issuing checks out? Let's get the deposit before we make the checks.
Sure.
So that's an important thing that can really, really damage credibility. And it's, as we're prepping for this, Kinsey was like, don't ask me how I know so much about this. It's not like I'm preaching at people saying, straight out your stuff. Like it can sneak up on you. It can happen. And then the whole like not having the money to pay your bills is the other like cash flow management piece. And it can be very overwhelming because all of the bills get lumped together and say, I owe $100,000 and I don't have $100,000. So break it apart. Yeah. This is kind of part of the inventory piece too of like, okay, who can wait? And one of the things I found particularly useful when I've ever found myself in a position like that is to be able to have a conversation with whoever you owe money to and be like, okay, here's where I'm at, and I want to make it good. So you're not playing games with them. They need to know that you're serious about paying them. You're not, ignoring them.
Yeah, don't be lying to people.
Yes.
Like make sure you're like, don't tell people that things that are not true.
Right. So it's like, I don't have the money to pay you, but I will pay you.
Yeah.
And the other thing about it is, that's not, you have to go one step further than that, because the person that you owe money to is also in control of that, in the sense of like, you owe them money. You promise them to pay them. So asking questions and saying, what do you think of if I gave you $1,000 now and I pay the rest off over the next 6 weeks? Or I don't know what the situation is. Maybe it's the next year.
Yeah.
But giving them agency to say, no, you owe me the money, pay me tomorrow, or I'm taking you to court.
Yeah.
That might be the response. I mean, very few people have ever found that unreasonable, but nonetheless, it's giving them agency to tell you how things are. And
also giving a plan of action for how you assume to not get back in that spot. Yeah. Like, if you're owing somebody money on your team or outside of your team, you got to have a plan that you're pitching to them. Because are you asking them to just continue, like continue moving forward and just hoping for the best, or you know what I mean? Like you got to just have some clarity around that, because you're gonna lose buy-in and you're gonna lose trust with your team or people outside of your team if you don't have that level of clarity.
Yeah, yeah. An open-ended problem nobody can buy into a solution for. If you're just saying, well, I can't pay you. I mean, that doesn't work.
Right.
Yeah. I think kind of jumping to just even on the payroll side, that would. I mean, I guess that's one of the bigger expenses any business has. Yeah. And it's one of those ones that can also be a timing thing. There've been, moments where there's big checks waiting, you're waiting for a big check to come through. And until that happens, you're on the final stage of a job and you're expecting a huge check. And until that comes through, you don't have the money.
Right.
And so to give people saying, here's where we're at and here's why we're there, here's the solution, people can buy into that. And a lot of people have grace with it. But then again, keeping enough of agency in a saying, instead of sort of telling them this is the way it is, I'm not going to pay you, just being like, can you wait a couple days? This is what's going on. And most people are like, okay, I think I can do that or whatever. Yeah.
Well, make sure you follow up with your people if it's not going to be a couple days and it's going to be a week, or it's going to be, you got to continue communicating with people. So it is a burden on you. Yeah. It's your responsibility. So it is a burden too.
I think also the other piece about this is many people that are listening to this that have or had are currently struggling or have had struggled in the past.
Yeah.
I'm getting all tongue tied here. But a current struggle or a past struggle also gives you this level of humility and being able to work with other people that are in a similar position as well. And I think there's an immense sort of, wanting to help other people when you've also struggled yourself. If somebody says, hey, Ben, I can't pay you, but here's my plan. If that you think that would work. I mean, I'm like, man, I've been that guy before. Yeah. So yeah, sure. Let's do that.
I get that.
Yeah. And particularly when they follow through and it happens, like you make sure that what you say you're going to do, you're going to do.
You do. Yeah, for sure. No, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. What about prioritizing what you pay? I think that was a concept that we've talked about of like, well, what are you structuring? Like, what are the most meaningful things? How do you prioritize, your list of expenses and accounts payable?
Yeah. Well, what's the side effect if you lose your team and you can't produce and you can't finish jobs? You're not able to collect the money that's owed you at the balance of a job. Like losing your people is a huge problem.
Sure.
And so in a priority, I mean, that's been always my top priority is like making sure the team's paid.
Yeah.
Above myself, above any other person or any other vendor. Like I can work with a bank and say, hey, listen, I don't have the money to pay you, but can we work something out? The bank they're not struggling for money. They just want to get paid.
Yeah.
It might hurt your credit. It might do other things, but like
there's still consequences, but
not like losing everything you have, And so if that's the side effect, I mean, and maybe the team's not that important. I mean, some businesses like, well, we're going to downsize, move down to one person, everything's fine.
Yeah.
But in a lot of businesses, your team is critical.
For sure. Well, and that goes back to before you make that decision of what the priority is, go back to your taking inventory step that we talked about before of like, well, what are the skills? What are we paying for right now? What has to stay? What can go? Things like that. So taking inventory, I think, helps you prioritize.
Yeah, and there's probably creative things you can do as well. We've had a couple of vendors that owed us money, and you're looking at if they took inventory and said, "Oh, we're sitting on several vehicles we could sell and pay that bill or whatever." Like there's sometimes people kind of either miss the solution or because they're stressed about the problem, thinking, well, it's got to be this thing or get overwhelmed as opposed to be, okay, let's figure out where we're at.
Take a step back.
Yeah. So I think it's like the last on the list is, I mean, number one is your people, and then last is really the banks. And I think in between is really like, well, I mean, we have to have an office and a lot of businesses. You have to have a home. You have to have your, necessities and food and shelter. So it's like somewhere in the middle are all those other things. Your team first, yourself, and your like thing in the middle, and then, squaring up with your banks last, and vendors are sometimes before a bank.
I would also, the personal necessities made me think I would also loop in, make sure your wife or your spouse is looped in on this as well, because I mean, it is their business too. It's something that I feel strongly about. I'm like, yes, you may be the one running it, operating it, those kinds of things, but your spouse is just as much a part of the journey.
Good point.
So
and they're going to have an impact from it if nothing else. Even if they're just a bystander that's not involved in it in day to day, they're going to have the consequences from it. It's such a good point. And how many times have we seen that come, where a spouse is carrying huge amount of weight because the decisions that are they're panning out around them. It's really good.
I was out of the notes, but just a wife stuff over here. Just talking about So what do you do? I think we talked about this a little bit. If you can't afford payroll, break it down for us in, a few, like what do you do? I can't cover my payroll. It's due on Friday.
Well, I think it comes back to the open-ended problem thing, like we talked about with the vendors, is you don't want to pitch an open-ended problem to your team. And what I mean by that is saying, we're out of money and I don't have a way of paying you and I don't know if I ever will. That doesn't work. And in the scenarios, I give you a couple of stories. We sold a business to somebody that found himself in a position where there's a lot of mismanagement, a lot of things went wrong. And eventually it was to the point where people couldn't get paid. And so it was this is the way things are. I can't pay you. And there wasn't any solutions. And everybody bailed immediately. And contrast that with experiences where you loop the team into it. And really, this is kind of like, how much buy-in did you have with your team in the first place? If you treated them like just a resource to be mined, well, there's very little buy-in. But if people are like, we're all pulling together and trying to win together and try to accomplish something great together, and we ran across a hurdle, across a problem that's, that we think we can solve, and here's how we're going to solve it. So it requires more than just this, like, I'm the boss and I'm going to tell you how things are. It's like at that moment, suddenly you find yourself in a position where you're not the boss, really. Your team has to kind of be a part of that whole problem solving together. And I think it's very humbling, when you realize I can't meet the need of a person and you're saying I have to ask them for something that I never would want to ask them before. And I think if you come at it from that perspective, sometimes people want to work with you, and not always, but you're saying, okay, here's what we're going to do about it. And does that work? And so I think it's the same strategy with vendors or with just people in general. But if there is an open-ended, like, we don't have a solution, then I think as a business, you have to really rethink. We think we have a failed strategy. Like, we don't have the ability to pay people, and I don't think we even have a solution. Then it's like, okay, at that point, you can't milk people for more. And can't ask them to stay around.
It would be wrong to do
It would be wrong
to
do that. And so I think that would be the only condition where I would ever ask somebody to hold a check is where you had a solution.
That's good.
We have a problem. Here's the problem. Here's what we're doing about it. And can you be a part of the solution? If they say no, it's no. But nonetheless, you give them agency in it.
That's good. It's good. Okay, let's talk about overhead, production output. I know we've had some episodes a while back, I think maybe, and we've hit on overhead a little bit. But break down overhead, production output, and the impact of that on being broke, not being broke. That kind of concept.
Overhead's a very fluid thing. Overhead goes up, it goes down, changes, and a relationship to output is really the equation that means so much to business. And so what I mean by that is overhead is these fixed expenses that exist whether or not you're making money or not. So, let's say we have an office and we pay for our tools that are in the sense of like trucks and equipment. We have these sort of expenses that are rolling up whether or not we're making money from those things or not. Hence, going back to the inventory thing where you want to know, are these things making you money? So in the last episode, we talked about that, adding up the overhead, the column of like, these are all the fixed expenses. I think the other piece now is saying, okay, what do we produce and what are we capable of producing? When I first started my construction business, I started seeing this like creep of overhead as I wanted to get more scale. I wanted to build the business. I needed to hire certain people to do certain things in the office and around the building and invest in like making, in equipment and the shop and all those. And those are just expenses that weren't necessarily making me money immediately. They were investments. And you can overinvest and you can build overhead you can't sustain.
Yeah.
Or forget to charge for it.
Yeah.
So you can have this overhead rate that requires you to mark things up 35% and you stick with the 20% markup you had before, and suddenly you're losing a lot of money.
A lot of money. Your entire profit margin potentially.
Right.
Yeah.
Your profit margin's gone, or you could be even losing money.
Yeah. Good point.
A net loss. So I think that's the piece that's very fluid with overhead, and it's also really key to point out. I've seen this pan out multiple times where you'll have a shop and 1 or 2 guys working in the shop, and then you have 4 people in the office. Mm-hmm. Like that one guy's never going to support that one guy in the office.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that office
4,
team.
Yeah,
you know
exactly.
what I mean? Like that whole, the equation's wrong. There's not enough output. There's not enough production in order to support the overhead. Yeah. So I think it's a really critical thing to look at. Do those things. Yeah, we really want to build a tool to help people analyze that quickly, because it's not an easy thing to track and keep on top of. But at a minimum, you need to know, what am I putting out in overhead and what am I producing? How many billable hours do I have? Yeah. And if I mark that up to cover the overhead, is that even fair anymore?
Sure. Yeah. Can I sell jobs for that?
Right. Yeah. Can I mark up a $35 an hour labor burden to $90 an hour? Maybe you can.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to pay for it if you have that high of overhead.
You better know it if that's that discrepancy.
Yes. Yeah. But you got to know that that's what it's costing you.
That's good.
And I think the risk to the overhead piece is, because of how fluid it is. We've talked about like the end of jobs when there's punch lists going on and suddenly there's nobody's paying you for all that work that you're doing. Mm-hmm. You're just trying to close a job out. There's not like a billable time. Yeah. So it can be very dangerous in those situations. And that's where you can find yourself broke. Hence why people kind of cash flow out at the end of a job. A lot of times they don't have any money.
Yeah. Well, and streamlining your processes, having clear checklists so that way
it's a great
you have
point.
An end point. You're like, okay, I can really efficiently go through this list and know my job's done. Yeah. I can move on. I can bill for X, whatever that may be.
Yep. Get to the end of a job and close it out strong.
That's good. Let's go into invoicing and change orders. Obviously, something that probably everyone listening to this podcast are well aware of. And maybe you hate invoicing. Maybe you...
I love it, but...
maybe you love it. I was going to say maybe you love it, but I'm like, I haven't heard of anybody who loves it. But
no,
you like getting paid.
Yeah.
So you have to invoice and you have to issue change orders. So... break that down for us in terms of like what do we do today? How do we actually implement a process so that way we can ensure that we're not leaving money on the table?
We believe that a foundational piece of invoicing is actually having a scope of work at the beginning of a job. You have to have some reference point, a document that you and your customer have agreed upon. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to even be fancy. It doesn't have to be a 15-page contract. You can have a 1-page thing that says, this is what we're doing, and enough detail in there where everyone's clear on what that is. Yep. And here's how we bill. And you're also training your client as you're running your project. And what I mean by that is, let's say you send an invoice every month sporadically. Yeah. You're training your client that you don't need money. That's the message they got from you, is this guy doesn't need money.
Yep, he's fine.
I had a plumber work on my house, and 6 months later, I got an invoice for it. What he's telling me is I don't need money. And obviously he does. Yeah. But at the same time, I mean, I can't imagine the impact on his cash flow if suddenly he realizes he's broke and he's sending out a bunch of invoices from 6 months ago. Sure. The other piece of that is that the confidence that your client now has in your ability to run your business is really kind of like, whoa, this is suspect now. Mm-hmm. Is that accurate? Like, how does anybody know what happened that
You're probably going to get a lot more pushback from your customer if it's 6 months later. Because one, they forgot. It's so long ago. You're like, did they even fix that? Like, or I've got an issue that, that wasn't there.
And the funny thing about it from a consumer standpoint in that situation, I'm thinking about all the problems we had with, the hot water was hooked up to the whole house. Only the hot water was hooked up to the whole house filter they installed, and the pipes weren't done this way, and all the problems. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, just the whole thing was negative, as opposed to quick in the moment. The bill came through, and I'd be like, oh wow, okay. We could have addressed that in the moment of just being like, I had a few problems, we could have worked something out, and so I'm also in a position where I've been that guy that's also sent the invoice.
Sure.
Never that late, but nonetheless where it's, where you're sending an invoice late enough where somebody is saying, I don't want to pay the whole thing.
Yeah, questioning.
But this is your cash flow. And you're training the client saying, every 2 weeks we're going to send you an invoice. Even if there's $50 worth of stuff that got done, it doesn't matter. We're just going to send you an invoice and you're going to pay it.
Yeah, that's good. And then change order, I think one of the things we talked about too, change orders and invoicing, if you don't have a clear scope of work, and you're not able to track what work is being done that's new outside of the scope, your customer doesn't know, your customer's going to take advantage of you.
Yeah.
If it's not clearly defined up front. You know, we were joking when we were prepping. It was like, well, thanks for the free kitchen, you know, because it's like, we're going to remodel something or, you know,
new kitchen, like 100,000.
Yeah. And so it's like with no clear scope of work, how do you even know what to change order, you know?
It's a great point.
Change orders.
I've had one, and I think I might have even brought up on another podcast episode before, but we were doing a kitchen remodel and a customer had upgraded from just a standard granite tops to the full waterfall on the island and the full splashes. And then it ended up being this rather substantial
increase in scope.
Job, you know, and so as I was going through the bills for that week, I looked at, that didn't get paid for. And so that was a change order miss. And that goes back to that knowledge of, by knowing that we lost money, suddenly we know, well, why did we lose money? And that was the problem.
Yeah.
It was a miss. And the customer was willing to pay for it because just the previous week he said, let's go and do that.
Yeah.
Now, if that was a month and a half later and we're settling up on the job and we say, oh, by the way, those countertops, and you'd be like, what? You know, you didn't bill me for that? It'd be a lot harder to collect on it. And so I think that's the principle with change orders. The ideal thing is you want that work done. It's optional. Here's what it would cost you if you want to do it. And you can say yes or no. Yeah. That's the ideal way to work a change order. Yeah. But even in situations like that one, where it was a little murky, it's much better to just talk directly to your customer. And I think most people are pretty reasonable. Like most people are saying, I don't want you to lose money. Yeah. And okay, that sounds fair. Yeah. I'll pay for it.
That's good. So how do you, as a contractor, how do you avoid getting in the spot where you are that far behind or not knowing, you know, not, I guess, logging, you know, like how do you avoid getting in that position to where you're like forgetting things or like your team isn't telling you what's being done or like what's the practical way of improving that process so that you're always billing for things efficiently?
I don't know that there's there's probably an actual term for this, but what happens is like this deep overwhelm that a contractor can feel when you're behind on everything. And so therefore nothing matters anymore. And and what I mean by that is it's not that you're not getting stuff done. It's not that you're not pushing really hard, but you're almost being like, you know what, I'm so far behind on invoicing that I'll take care of that later. Sure. As opposed to being like, I have to make space for it. It doesn't matter what falls through the cracks. Yeah. This Friday I'm invoicing. Yeah. And make a discipline out of being like, once a week or once every other week, I am going to send invoices come hell or high water. Yeah. I'm just going to get it done.
Yep. That's good.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. It's a discipline. It's like a checklist thing. Because, I mean, a month can go by, 2 months can go by. And this is how free work gets done because there's not a checklist. I mean, and I've had a few people I've had to call back and say, hey, you know, you came out and did that and I never got a bill for it. Yeah. You know, and that was just the honest thing to do. But, you know, not
every consumer's that way.
Not everyone's going to do that. But I'm also feeling the pain as a former contractor of being like, well, that guy came out. He spent time, poor guy.
Pay for this.
You know, like he can't do that for free. You know, who's paying for those little kids?
That's good. That's good. And then I think another thing that we talked about, and we have talked about on the podcast before, is just documentation, right? Like daily logs and actually like noting, taking pictures on the job, like what got done that day, what conversations did you have with the customer, making sure that those things are written down so that way, whenever you go to your day, your invoicing and change order day or your estimating day or whatever it is, you know, whatever the blocked off time, because you do have to block it off. And, you know, we've talked about calendars before and I love calendars, but you have to block it off because it's not just going to do itself. Unfortunately, AI is not that good to do.
Who would want it to be that good anyway? You know, who would listen to AI if it told you this Friday you're going to do this? You know, Siri tells you what to do. Forget it. I'm my own man.
Yeah, true. I meant the actual invoicing part.
I see what you
mean.
Doing
your work for you.
Okay.
It's not that good.
Yeah.
But anyway, so you know, really finding a solution, finding a system to where you and your team are documenting in one place to streamline, you know, what's happening, so that way, whoever's managing the invoicing, whether it's your office manager or you, it's very clear. Yeah. I can quickly go through and be like, okay, this needs done for this customer.
It's amazing to me that when we look back at a week, like last week, how little actually is in the top of my memory about last week. But if I went to daily logs, the week is now like I can relive it exactly like it happened just by having a few notes. Sure. And it could be something as basic as, you know, we had 2 guys out on the job and they worked on installing decking. And
Yep.
They were there for 6 hours or they're there for 12 hours. And we had this conversation with the client around whether or not we're going to put this style of railing or that style of railing. And they chose that. Yeah. That could be a simple log. I mean, with phones these days, use Apple Notes or Android Notes and do voice to text saying, and it's habitual. Yep. We started this episode off of being like, information is limited in its ability to affect change. Yep. It's because this thing becomes habit and you have to do it long enough for it to become a habit or it doesn't serve you at all.
Yeah, that's true.
But if you have that data, boy, oh boy. I mean, my dad told me this time, he's on the North Shore of Chicago working on a project. And this was just when he was a carpenter. Mm-hmm. Somebody had questioned whether or not he had the billable hours that he had on a project and said, I don't remember him being there for that long that day to my dad's boss. My dad pulled out his log and said, well, I started at the shop at 7:45. I fabricated these things, did this. And the client had no questions after that. Sure. But that kind of that's the kind of caliber of information you need to be a successful contractor. Where suddenly the customer's like, nope, I got what I'm looking for. They know what they're doing. Yeah. They've got a process. Yeah.
They're not making
stuff up.
They're not, exactly.
Not just pretending like, we were there for 10 hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's true. That's good. Okay, I like it. We talked about change orders, invoicing, practical things for that. Set aside time, set aside a day, block off your schedule to do it, have checklists to be able to, come back to. What about mentorship and accountability?
Well, something we both have really appreciated is people, realizing how much people will offer without any payment. And I think we just sometimes miss it. It's all around us. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things the thing that prevents us a lot of times from reaching out to people as mentors is any mentor also has their weaknesses. Mm-hmm. And I think we can be very dismissive of other people when they're not superhuman in the sense of like, well, that's not really a mentor because they're terrible at this, but great at that. No, learn from the thing they're great at, dismiss the thing that they're bad at, and learn as much as you can. And I think that was the thing that I had to learn as well. Like, wow, this guy can learn so much about sales from him. He doesn't have to be a great project manager. No. That's somebody else.
Yeah.
And
the meat and spit out the
bones. Exactly, right. And somebody, and a lot of times it doesn't work for our particular business. But how much of just being able to voice things to somebody, as working in a business together, like if I need to discuss something out loud and just having somebody to listen to the idea and be like, oh, that's a terrible idea, just by just giving it voice or being like, oh, we can take that a different level and you can respond to it being like, what about this? And suddenly just having, it's not even like you're even trying to drive for something. You're just having coffee with somebody. Having a breakfast with somebody.
I was talking to another entrepreneur this morning and he was talking about how like just being a business owner, entrepreneur, you're so alone in everything, like kind of what you're talking about of like, well, you can choose to do whatever you want to do today. Like nobody's your boss. And that's a freedom. And it's also a risk point, right? Because it's like if you don't have the discipline, if you don't have, someone or something that's reining you in a little bit, then it can be really hard to actually push the needle forward. And so with a mentor, you can get a little bit of that accountability and have someone to help problem solve, like you said, think through ideas out loud with, and move the needle a little bit quicker, keep you on task, keep you relevant,
Flipping it to the positive too. If you're unsure of yourself, what better way of having confidence if somebody says, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Great idea.
Great.
Run with that.
Mm-hmm. So,
it really helps.
That's really good. I think one of the things we this episode's heavy. It's, hey, maybe you're broke. Maybe, like that's a problem. It's very clear. I think if somebody, what would you say to somebody who maybe said, oh, I struggle with that. I struggle with that. I struggle with that. Like on every single one of these problems or, or symptoms. I mean, both symptoms than problems, right? Yep. What would you say to somebody who maybe is like, oh man, I struggle with all those things?
Well, sometimes we have a dream and we have this passion for doing what we love, and it feels like we have to take the opportunity. Now's the time. And regardless of what happens, I'm going to do it. Full steam ahead. Yeah. Timing is everything. It's like when you talked about earlier about when you buy the truck. Is as important as if you buy the truck. Yeah. If you buy it before you have the money, well, that's a problem.
Right.
Now you don't have cash. I think a lot of times we can prematurely start a business. The dream can be there, but maybe it's time for us to go learn from somebody else, to get a job. So many times, I wanted to start this business 13 years ago, and it wasn't the time.
You weren't ready. Yeah.
Yeah. There was things that needed to happen first.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we just need to take a step back and just realize it's not everything. And there's so many other people that appreciate the talents that you have. And it's sometimes it's not the right time to do this. And there's nothing wrong with throwing in the towel sometimes and be like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to get a job for now. And this is not the time to do this. Too much stress to my family. It's too much, health challenges to me personally. It's not everything. It doesn't define you.
Yeah, that's good.
And I think that's the thing that sometimes it gets missed in all of this.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I love it. What other final thoughts do you have?
Well, being broke is overwhelming, right? I mean, there's an emotional element to that, and I think that can be the loudest thing that you hear is that I'm broke and I'm broken, and it's the opposite. Just because you're broke doesn't mean you are broken.
Yeah,
and you can have so much going for you. Today might be terrible. You might be under extreme stress, but tomorrow could be the best day of your life. You could have the amazing opportunities that you would miss by letting that emotional distress get to you where you can't function. You can't give in. You can't just quit. You can't think that this is the end. And I think that's that mental fortitude to be able to stick with it is something that you have to have if you're going to be a business owner. If you're going to win, that's what defines people that succeed. To say that, okay, today is terrible, but I'm going to push ahead still and get the most important thing done today.
Yeah, it's so good.
And break it down into small pieces. Make that plan together. And sometimes you just need to zoom out a bit, take inventory, put together, this is what I got going for me. These are the things in my wins column. These are the losses, and I'm going to make a strategy to deal with the liabilities. And I have all of these things going for me, and make a plan. And suddenly you realize one of two things: things aren't as bad as you thought they were, or they're much worse. And you can work around that too. True. You know what I mean? Sometimes you don't recognize you even have a problem. And then you say, whoa, things are bad. But in either case, you have strategy, you have a plan of action. And I think that's the thing that really to take moving forward from here is take inventory and recognize that once you take action, don't let the emotions rule the day. And I think you guys will win. And I can say that I've lived through that. And the amount of mental toughness you get from having the overwhelm of and it doesn't define you. People still love me, regardless of if I have money.
Yeah, true. That's true.
And if they cared, if that was
they don't love you, then they're not your friends anyway.
Yeah. Exactly. So keep up the good work, guys. This is not easy to run a business. It seems it's fun, when it's working, but the challenges are what it's all about too. I mean, you got to love the challenges too.
That's good. That's worth replaying over yourself every day, right there. That last little nugget. I'm like,
Rick. Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. Right. Yes. You remember the clip with who's the actor, Sam? The Chris Hemsworth, Hemsworth. Yeah, where he was today's your day,
yes.
Motivational speech. It's a good YouTube clip.
Keep this podcast.
Right. You're awesome.
Maybe not the whole podcast because I'm being broke. That might be sad every day.
Yeah, right.
Just the last part.
Yeah, right.
Good
stuff.
Yeah.
Today could be an amazing day.
Yeah, today's gonna be an amazing day.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah. All right, guys.
Way to go, guys. We're here for you. Keep crushing it.